We're going to have a roll call. Let's do the pledge of allegiance.
Would you all please stand and join me?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any abstentions or comments?
None.
Tonight's agenda and the minutes from 26th and 28th of June. Do we have a motion to, anybody have any comments, questions?
28 demos are Saturday or Friday morning.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to accept tonight's consent agenda consisting of tonight's agenda and the meeting minutes of June 26th and June 28th, 2013.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any announcements? The dumpster days are coming up. Obviously,
July 26th, 27th.
26th and 27th, not the 19th and 20th.
No, that's what they call it.
Okay. All right. So,
And where will they be located?
they are located downtown on south side of the road.
Just past by the right now.
I want to thank the Princess Pageant contingent for taking care of our flags on the 4th and June 14th Flag Day. Any other announcements? So, open to, open to a public hearing with comments on the Sterling Agriculture Protection Area and any comments on public comments on Chapter 17 of the use ordinance. Commercial district.
I move we enter into a public hearing discussing land use ordinance, chapter 17, commercial district, as well as Sterling agricultural protection area.
I would make one comment, and that is that we will still need to have a public hearing at the planning commission level on land use ordinance for 17 before we can do anything, maybe movement on it. But since we'd already advertised this, we will take any comments that someone has at this point. Okay, anyone in the public want to make a comment? Okay.
Seeing none, I'd make a motion that we close the public hearing for land use ordinance Chapter 17 Commercial District and Sterling Agriculture Protection Area approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public hearing closed. Okay. So, the action item is the Sterling Agriculture Protection Area approval. Do I have a motion to approve this project?
I motion that we approve this. I move that we motion to approve the Sterling Agricultural Protection Area approval.
Second?
Okay, any comments, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to discussion items, we have with us Chaplain David Jones from Community Covenant Program with National Guard.
That's right. So my name is Chaplain David Jones, and just to start off, thank you for allowing me to come again. I was on your agenda several months ago, and I ended up late for a scouting reason and couldn't make it here in time. So once that happens with my program, I have other meetings set up. It takes me a while to get back, so I appreciate you allowing me back. This is the second time we've come to present to your town. My colleague, Sergeant Hiram Durfee, came well over a year ago, and if I recall, the power was out that night. And so he presented by flashlights of cell phones, if I recall, so I just texted him on the way in and let him know that I was going to say totally hi. Not that you remember what he looked like. But anyway, the Community Covenant Program, I'm just going to do a brief explanation for those of you who might not have been here, not do my full presentation, but the Community Covenant Program is a program that was established in 2008 by the Department of the Army, with the means of getting the communities that surround active duty installations in communication with the support and services that are on those installations, so that returning and retiring service members and veterans and their families can have access to the gamut of resources that are provided both in the municipality plus the military base. That doesn't really help us here in Utah. We only have one active duty Army base, and that's Deadway. We have one active duty Air Force base and Air Force base, but we took this program on in 2010 with the mission of getting all of our cities and towns throughout the state of Utah on board with the Community Covenant Program to show solidarity and support to the service members, veterans, and families. I want to be very clear that we never go into a town or a county or a city and say that you're not supporting us, because we don't believe that. We know that we got outstanding patriotism and outstanding support from our organizations here in the state of Utah. But the Community Covenant Program, for those who sign, kind of increases that visibility of the support and services that are available to our service members, veterans, and families, and also just gets everybody on the same page. So I just brought along a brief video that you wouldn't be able to watch that night with no power, so if we can just watch that for a minute and explain the program, and I'll entertain some discussion and some questions about it. So.
To each of you. Challenge yourself to spend time to get educated about the issues facing this generation of veterans.
We need to do something beyond just appreciation. We need to reach out and demonstrate to their support any way that we possibly can.
Ladies and gentlemen, you need to know that your fellow citizens, your sons and daughters, are at war.
Community Covenant Program is a program where communities can come together and pledge their support for military members. It starts with a signing, an event where the community comes together and signs.
The signers of the covenants recognize the following things.
We as a community, all of us who are here this evening, recognize the commitment and the sacrifice that service members and their families make for our community.
That service members find strength through their families, and their families find strength through the community of which they are a part. Tonight represents the beginning of a national movement in our community to recognize the selfless service of our servicemen and women.
Community Covenant signing is an actual event, and for us, we want that to be the beginning of the relationship that we have with that town or city. Then we would like to follow through with the cities to keep them aware of the challenges that the military members in their community are experiencing and the help that's needed. We want those community leaders to come together and pledge their support. We ask them how they want that signing to go. A lot of them have been elaborate with lots of festivities, and some of them have been very intimate.
Very exciting for me. Obviously, I'm a big, huge fan and a supporter of the military.
We think every last one of them is important because it's the beginning of our relationship with that town. We want it to remain a good, long-standing relationship so that that city knows where to turn when they have military members that are in distress or having challenges. we want it to be a two-way street. We want them to be able to come to us, and we want to be able to go to them. We want to be able to line up the resources so that we have those things to send the military members and their families to. We want to educate the community and those community leaders on what those challenges are that our military families have.
We are here to participate in the Community Covenant Program and bringing together all of our business community, our educational community, our health service providers, our city services, to give support to the deployed military families in our community.
A military member is a part of a community, and when that service member goes away for an extended period of time, then the family needs to pick up the pieces and continue to go on. Some of the cities have created a sign, a big community covenant sign, and they posted it at their city limits. So when you're driving into the city, it says we're a community covenant city.
It's nice to see, not just in one place, but all places, the support and firsthand knowing what support comes from these small communities to service members when we are deployed. And I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
So what we're doing with the community covenant program in the state of Utah is just bringing together all of the communities. We have nearly 75% of all of our cities and towns in the state of Utah have signed, and the only reason the others haven't is because it takes sometimes to work through the state. I've taken a liberty, as I just did some research on your website, and drafted a copy of what a covenant document for your town might look like. So there's a few copies there that you can look at. If it's determined that your town would like to go forward with something like this, it can be as simple as signing these documents tonight. We often do them in town council meetings, and that officially kind of enters you into the covenant program. Now what that means is it just increases the level of communication that we have with you guys. We can provide training to a point of contact that you have in your city or town that you designate as a military liaison. We have a partnership with Utah State University where we broadcast a quarterly training through their extension services that person can even watch in their own home, or if they can't get to it live, they can archive it. And that provides them with the information and resources that if an issue ever arose in your town with a service member, veteran, or family, they could have the basic resources to respond to that. In addition to that, the lists go up to the state that show which cities and towns that we have in the covenant program. Now, I just like to be perfectly frank. The actual signing is a formality. We like to enter the relationships regardless, but sometimes this sort of a kickoff kind of creates some good feelings about the program. So we like to provide this to you. We encourage cities to consider doing it. If it's something you want to do now, that's fine too. Otherwise, if you have an event coming up, a town celebration, you might have just had some because we're going through some of the things, or if you want to create something around it, then we can work with you and be a consult team to create a good event that'll kick off your town's official program. So I don't know if I've explained it clearly enough, but I'll open up any questions that you might have about what the covenant program is and how you guys might be a part.
Any questions? What are some of the ways that we might participate?
Well, the ways are really limited by your imagination and, of course, your resources. One of the things that I'd have to do some research, and I failed to do so today, to see even how many current National Guardsmen, for example, live in your town. You might know more so than I do. But every town is plumb full of veterans as well that we can reach through veteran service organizations. But some of what other towns have done, they've done things like held a biannual and quarterly event for military members, veterans, and their families. Like Richfield, for example, rents out the pool once a quarter for their families, or the movie theater, or something to provide some additional benefit to them. Some cities and towns and counties have put together training for their law enforcement, which we can be a part of as well. What I really like about that is for example, you see a service, a law enforcement, a police officer pulls over an individual because they're swerving, and happens to notice that they have National Guard plates, or as he's getting his license out, he sees a military ID. With some additional training, that might trigger him that, of course we don't expect leniency in that situation, but maybe just a little bit more understanding that maybe this guy just came back from Iraq, maybe there's a lot more going on, that we have services that we can provide to this individual. On the venue of law enforcement is if you ever have a service member in your community that's deployed, you can have the family member go in and sign up for an additional monthly patrol program where the law enforcement just pays a little bit more attention to that neighborhood, knowing that the service member is, which is often the breadwinner of the family, is out. And so those are just a few examples of some things that other people have done. We're your consults to come up with anything else. I don't know if that answers your question.
What other options are there? Because we're a pretty small town.
Right.
We don't have police force.
Okay.
Of course, we're up in the state area.
Right. You know, and what I tell small towns is I did a covenant signing in Antimony, which I think is one of the smallest towns that we've done. We did it at their elementary school that consisted of 12 children, and there was that many veterans there as well, 12 children, and their population is 120, so I thought it was interesting, it was 10% children, 10% veterans. But one of the service members stood up and he said, coincidentally, 60 years ago that day, he entered basic training. And he said he served his country, he went to the war, didn't really ask for much beyond that. But with tears, he stood before these elementary kids and said, if nothing else ever happens from this program, I'm just grateful that we were remembered. And even if nothing ever happens, no activities are ever done, we know that the appreciation is felt and by the service members, families, when they know that their town and their city are behind them.
And we'll grow. As we grow, there's often more services.
Absolutely.
The services we mentioned aren't on services that we have at this point in time. But they're probably the options that we can come up with among council.
And the good part about it, and like I said, we do this anyway, but the covenant program kind of enters us into a little bit of a partnership where we can bounce ideas less of us, we can consult with you, we share best practices from what other cities and towns are doing, not only in the state of Utah, but even across country.
If someone in Utah were deployed, they would be with the Utah National Guard, right?
Not necessarily, because here in the state of Utah, in southern Utah, for example, we have an Army Reserve unit just barely in St. George on the Washington border. And a lot of people don't think about that, especially being in southern Utah. All we hear about is Triple Deuce, which is a unit that I'm a proud member of. But we also have military intelligence units down here. We have recruiting programs, our ROTC programs, and also a slew of veterans that serve in all types of services. So one thing we found with this covenant program is sometimes we'll do signing events and we'll see military members come out of the woodwork that we didn't even know existed. Like, you'd be surprised how many drill from out of state. There are guys that live here but drill in Vegas or live here but drill in Oklahoma or whatever. And it just lets them know that they still have the community back at home.
The reason where I was going with that was I was wondering if the person is in the Utah National Guard, do they have a military there?
Yes.
They do.
And their families, as the parents usually do, is turning up for the military.
Okay. Any other questions at this point?
Not a question, but just a suggestion. I'm supportive of the idea. You mentioned signing tonight. I'd rather not do that, but not for bad reasons, I think for good. We're going to have, I believe, Mayor, a newsletter you'll be sending out with our billing for the quarter. And I would like to suggest we put this as an action item for our next meeting on August 14th. So that we might be able to bring out some of the veterans and others who might be involved in the military. Like you say, we don't always know they're out there, and it would be nice to be able to give them a chance, which wouldn't exist if we were to sign tonight.
And we can also help with that too. We can work through our veteran service organizations and our family assistance programs and target your area with the people that we can identify that live here and let them know as well. So I think, from what I understand, the next steps might be for you guys to put that on your agenda, and I'll just continue to communicate with you, Bob. Is that okay for that night? And
we'll advertise this.
Absolutely. So would you like to just hang on to these? And these are just samples. You don't have to stick with these if you wanted something different. If I spelled somebody's name wrong, which I do every now and then. Other times we sometimes have representative samples of the community as well, like other outstanding members of the community, but often it's just be like an official to sign as well. So anyway, that's where we can leave it, and that's perfectly fine with me. We want this to be your program, and I just brought these as a sample of your reason. So.
Well, while you said it would be real easy to sign tonight, it is a covenant, and to me that's a contract.
Absolutely.
And that requires us to have an action item, which we need to give advance notice about. And so You got it down?
The August 14th, same time.
Right.
I'll put that in my calendar and plan on coming back. I'm close, so it's easy.
Okay.
Tomorrow I get to drive all the way out to Boulder, that's the fun.
Well, that's a nice job.
It is beautiful. Hey, well, if there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and turn it down.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, is there anyone here representing the Leicester development on Center Road? Okay. They had requested being on here, but weren't able to contact them, so we didn't know if they were not. Moving on to discussion of the land use ordinance, chapter 17, commercial district. Do we have a mic that Bob can use?
I'm sorry.
Do we have a mic Bob can use? No, we do recognize now that this has to go back to planning commission before we can actually take a vote on it.
I actually don't remember if the planning commission had a public hearing on this or not.
We what?
They held a public hearing on 3 or 4 code
Yeah.
amendments, but
That one,
this would perhaps wasn't one of them.
we thought it had, but when we looked there, it wasn't there. So, let's see, does anybody have a copy from them? The first change was in 1733, auto impound yard provided that such yard does not exceed 10,000 square feet. That was a 50% reduction from what was first mentioned. And that the yard is fully enclosed by a site securing 6 foot or higher required by town council fence or wall. And that it makes reference to 17.4 and 17.10 in this chapter. The impound lot must comply with the Utah state standards that are listed and where you can find those. Under motor vehicle. Yeah. Our lawyer, Gary, looked over this, and the only real concern he had was if we wanted to add something about towing. He said we didn't have to, that we could just abide by whatever the state regulations were on towing, because towing obviously would be involved in this.
Mayor, I don't want to put anybody on the spot or council, but citing the section 17.4, 17.10, and then stating the state requirements. Has anybody read R 873-22 M-17?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we had times, sorry, we had this at the last meeting.
I don't agree with this. I have a lot of problems with this impoundment lot as I've expressed. I'm very disappointed that the person assumed that they could do whatever they wanted with their land. I mean, we haven't had an ordinance or a business license issued. In this case, what this does, this lowers the standards for our city, which we require all lots to have a paved concrete or asphalt. In this one, it allows them to have gravel or whatever. Plus, many cities, they do not have the impoundment lot in commercial, but they have it in an industrial zone. I think this is a major mistake. This line should come out, shouldn't be a part of it, and there should be other modifications made to make this more strict, because we are talking about towing, we're talking about cars that are not impounded, but they are cars that are for some other reason there. And it's a broad use and not a restricted use. And this does not get enough restriction. And I think until the person who's applying for this is willing to comply with all of our standards and not modifying it to fit for their standards. If we turned other businesses down, it would not allow them to do it unless they put a hard surface in, which would be the concrete or asphalt. And I think it's extremely unfair that we're going to allow something to circumsede our city, because if you read in part of this, it can say we can set a standard, we don't have to accept the state standard. And then there's other things in here about how they have to comply with motor vehicle and all these other things. And so they have to have an office, they have to have a signpost, they have to have regular hours, they have to be open. I don't know how much everybody read through that, but I'm absolutely opposed to the wording as it is, and I'm appalled by the fact that people think they can come in this town and do whatever they want, and then we have to go, oh, we're really sorry, we'll try and help you out, when they're taking advantage of us and the people in this community. So.
Frank, just to share with you, because I know you were unable to attend the last meeting, it was asked of the individual whether or not any work had already been begun, and the response was that they were modifying it for their own personal use at this point and were waiting for approval before they actually did anything that would be related to a business or commercial activity. I just mentioned that. The other thing is, I'm the one who suggested language on complying with Utah state standards, but what I was intending was that the impound lot must comply at all times at a minimum with the Utah state standards. And my rationale behind that was that should it be established and should the state come up with standards that were above and beyond what were already in place, I didn't want us to have to come back and update our ordinance, but rather be able to know that that minimum would be upgraded. It was not trying to eliminate any of our town requirements, but rather to make sure we captured on an ongoing basis efficiently the state ones. So that's a bit of a modification that I would suggest from what we see here.
Yeah, but it doesn't make, I didn't fall off the turnip truck. This is an absolute take advantage of the town, and I'm very appalled by it, and I'm irritated by it. And they could say, well, I was going to do it for some other reason. It'd just be like, okay, I'm going to go by your house, I'm going to set up an ice cream stand, and but I don't have approval, but I'm just thinking about starting a business. And so all the wrappers and sticks that fall on the ground, I'm sorry about it, so who's going to clean it up? We're not enforcing anything in this town. We haven't. We've got people who are violating our ordinance. How are we going to do this one without impacting everybody else in town? My question is the council ready to turn to everybody that has a car that's illegally parked in the yard, or is a junk car that's in the front of the yard, or they have junk in the front? Are we ready to enforce that? Because this gentleman or person has cars that are sitting out in the gravel, they're not in the impound area, they just dropped off, they're in violation of our ordinance. So, I mean, we took an oath as council people to enforce, but if we're going to make exceptions all the time and not follow the rules, then that's why have a council.
If I could make another comment, you brought up the concept of an industrial area versus the commercial area, and Joe, I know you brought that up as well at the last meeting. As I was reading through the minutes, it reminded me of that. And I would be interested in knowing a bit more about where impound lots are located in this part of Utah. My only experience with an impound lot was when I was retrieving an automobile that I had shipped cross country. And I do realize it was located in an area far different from what's being proposed here. I also realized I was the only person happy to be at that lot that day. that it is a, you know, a different type of business, and I would be interested in knowing more about kind of the settings that would normally be appropriate for impound yards.
Bob, I was wondering, is there an official definition for parking lot?
Official definition of parking lot?
No, because what I'm thinking a parking lot is something at a business or facility where people come in and are parked temporarily and then they leave. And so you have people coming and going all day long. Vehicles coming and going all day long.
The Leeds code, I think like most towns, require that parking lots are hard surfaced. That's a,
So my point that I'm moving towards is, would the impound lot be considered a parking lot, or is it just an impound lot?
Anything that you're resting a vehicle on gets parked, therefore it would be included, because they're gonna drive it out eventually if they pay the fee. So it wasn't brought in by helicopter.
I think you can make a distinction, you know, and that's a good question. You want to make a distinction between a normal parking lot, which would require hard surface, and an impound yard, or what is might be considered a storage area. You could have separate standards, just like we're talking about for an impound yard. Whether you want to require that they be fully paid, that's what they call. The one thing, the way it's drafted right now, it says a maximum size of 10,000 square feet. So that's a relatively small, you know, with a quarter acre. That's basically kind of a standard building lot. So, I mean, just to answer your question, a parking lot is required to be hard surface. That is, does that answer your question?
No, the question was, would a parking lot be considered by definition different than an impound lot? Or would an impound lot be considered a parking lot? And the point being, and if you can, you know, states it here, in our surfacing to provide a dustless surface. And if you have vehicles coming and going all day long, then yes, there is dust. But if you don't have a lot of coming and going, and it's more of storage, then it would seem like dust wouldn't be as much of an issue. The road base that is required by UDOT is supposed to pack pretty hard and provide a relatively dustless surface, even though it's not asphalt or cement.
Bob, if I'm not mistaken, that's where it falls, according to St. George and Cedars, the larger city school systems. That's where it falls in the category of commercial and industrial, where the red plates is out in industrial, with the block line and everything else is, and you know, he's on 20 acres, and maybe it's not hard surface, it's hard to get into it.
Right.
But its parking isn't.
That's right.
But that is an industrial area.
Yes.
And we're talking commercial, and I don't know if St. Louis City would allow an impound lot in a commercial area to not be hard surface.
Yeah, and I don't have, I think the St. George code fully memorized, but I don't believe we do. I don't believe that's allowed. I mean, you have a difference in repair with a towing. I mean, you can have a towing facility, but just a straight out impound yard is typically the industrial zone. We don't have a maximum area. So, you know, in the case of Red Lake, you got, probably 20 acres, and some of them are very large. And parking is only required for the customer area, the customer and employee parking, not the storage area. But again, the difference is that's an industrial area and not a commercial zone. So, commercial zone in St. George typically don't, parking area employees, customers have to be paid. There's also a landscape requirement. There's also a privacy wall requirement and site exterior.
I'd just like to make another comment. Our responsibility as a council is not to solve the problem for individuals. They are to meet our code expectations and what we have set. And so if we're trying to modify it to accommodate when the person doesn't even follow the rules, was asked to move the vehicles, goes ahead and puts in the fence, puts in the rock base, and does everything else, and then says, oh, I'm going to do it for whatever reason you mentioned. I mean, that's ridiculous. So this like anybody in town could do whatever they wanted to, and then we'd work it out to be nice and accommodating. We mentioned it before that it had to have a hard surface. And we're continuing to accommodate for some reason that I just do not accept. I mean, once we open the door, then we just allow anybody to do whatever they want.
The issue at hand that I'm looking at is not discussing a specific impound lot. The issue at hand we have is, do we want to amend our Chapter 17 of our land use ordinance, our commercial zone, to allow impound yards to be in town Leeds? Whether it's on the site that is being proposed, or whether it's right next to Walton Plaza, or next to the grocery store. The job of the town council and planning commission, as I understand it, is planning. Because what do we want our town to look like today? What do we want our town to look like in the future? And Main Street, that's our only main thoroughfare in town. When a visitor comes, Main Street's all they're going to see. Right now, it has a great characteristic, has tree lines, historical, farming community. We have small shops, little cafe to stop into.
Tree City.
Yeah, we're working on becoming a Tree City. The concept of impound lots within our commercial zone, which is essentially Main Street, does that fit in with our town? You know, you've got walled in or fenced in areas with razor wire on them. Does that fit in with our two-row tree line city? I don't think so.
Well, that's my whole point I'm making is, we would have, as a planning team, or planning commission, or city, would have never said, oh, let's see, we would like to have an impound lot in the town of Leeds. Just because somebody asked that there be one and brought it up. And so we're doing that, but that's not necessarily something that we would have put as a priority or long-term plan. We all know that.
Sure.
Because we had spent all this time and money with Forum Tomorrow, and we had the people in the town said what they wanted. They didn't say they wanted an impound lot. They didn't want industrial on Main Street. They wanted to keep the agriculture. And here we are talking about modifying something for somebody when it wasn't even anything that we wanted on the radar.
Can I ask, not to stir the pot, but at one point in time, a few years ago, we actually did have a small impound lot next to the market. That was fenced in, it wasn't normal. Was that an oversight, or was that something that they had business lesson for?
I have no idea. Obviously, it must have been an oversight.
They couldn't have got a business license under the current ordinance, you know.
Because they ran, operated that for 7 years.
Was that part of the auto repair business that was next to
It was part of the auto repair service, but they also rotate shifts with highway patrol and impound in the sheriff's department. So they did have a wrecking right there. And having that back. I just don't want to know where that stood at that point in time.
So from what I've read, it was intent that we didn't have industrial area. Leeds has been a small town, and we didn't feel like previous commissions and councils didn't feel like an industrial area would fit with the town. That's why we're looking at if an impound lot is something that might be a helpful business to have in our community, then we would need to make provision for it and make provision under conditional use so that we can have a plethora of those businesses suddenly coming up. Each one would have to go through the conditional use process in order to make that business situation happen. Any other comments at this point?
I would suggest we strike it and not even entertain. I'm really concerned about the people who own the land up above and they want to have a development up there and they want to look down at an in-town. What happens to their property value? People drive into town, what happens to our property value? And so I'm thinking about the citizens and the investments they made. So if I was going to put an in-town lot behind your house or someone else's, it would be, people say, not in my backyard. That's what people would say. We don't have anybody right there, so I won't say anything yet. But that's the basic situation we're faced with. And I'm just thinking about the fact that it doesn't go with the forum tomorrow. It doesn't go with plans that we have for this town. And we're just trying to accommodate because someone made a request, but then when they hadn't did whatever they wanted to. So it makes matters worse. And I'm basically tired of people coming in, tearing up roads and doing things without permits and asking for forgiveness. So either if we're going to do this, then everybody in town needs to know that we have to enforce all the ordinances. And that's going to be a very big task. So, because obviously it's not being enforced now.
Anything else? I should bring up something, and I meant to respond to your email about site plan development. And that was that this particular site had already gone through that process a long time ago. And it has all of its water and such as electricity already in place, concrete pad for building. So it didn't seem like it would fit that was a requirement that should be instigated at this point, that the site had already been developed.
Sure, and I think, again, we need to separate what we're talking about tonight, which is the required land use ordinance and a proposed use for a certain piece of property. The question we have with this land use ordinance is, do we want impound lots in the commercial zone? And if there weren't an applicant before us, my offhand answer would be no, that doesn't really fit in with the town Leeds.
Mr. Dunphy and I are fairly good friends, but I'd have to agree with Joe Allen. If we're somebody applying for the same ordinance, we're going to change our conditional use, I'd have to agree that it doesn't fit in that commercial zone. It needs to be an industrial zone.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's impound area, there's got to be a place for them. But is that place at our most prominent intersection in the town of Leeds? No. And is it in our commercial zone in the town of Leeds? No.
At this point, this would be having to go back to planning commission to have a public hearing. And I'm getting the feeling that there would be 3 no votes if it came back to council. And if that is true, then I see no point in trying to proceed further. But I also was hearing you say that you thought there was a place for the town park in our community. There was a need for it. And if that's true, then how would we make that happen if that would take place?
We would need to look at our land use map and say, where does an industrial zone fit? Where's the place for that?
Rezone it.
And then we can come up with an industrial zone ordinance, talking about permitted uses, whether it's impound lot or diesel mechanic shop or manufacturing, all those uses that fit into the industrial categories.
If I could just offer up, we have it as a discussion item tonight. I think a variety of council people have expressed concerns about it. I share the concern, as I did indicate, with regard to the industrial and wanting to understand more about kind of where these types of facilities are located in towns, and sharing the concerns about what impact it will have. But since it was a discussion item, one thing I've always felt very strongly about is that as a town council person, our responsibility is to listen to all the input, let the process be followed, and when the time comes for us to either take action if it's being suggested or not, that is the time that we make our final decision. So I don't want to say how I would vote tonight. I don't think it's inaccurate the way you were characterizing where people's current feelings are, but I think we're all open to seeing the process gone through and then reaching a decision based on all of the input that we would receive, if indeed it was brought forward to us for consideration and request for approval.
So it would seem like if we needed public input, that we should advertise this for the next planning commission meeting and see what public sentiment is at that time.
And I would suggest on the agenda for that planning commission meeting about the public hearing, we've had a lot of public input saying, we don't know what these issues are, but give us a little one-line sentence. This might be an appropriate time to say, should the town of Leeds have an industrial zone, or should the town of Leeds amend its commercial zoning ordinance to allow impound cars?
Yes, I think that would be appropriate.
Or allow
Bob, are you involved in creating that agenda? Danielle?
Danielle.
Is that something to be done, Danielle?
Absolutely. I do have one question. I thought that, Bob Nicholson, I thought that we didn't have to do the public hearings. Did we discuss?
No, the planning commission has to have, the town council does not.
Okay.
Anything with land use, that's what we've done the research
All right.
last week.
Town council is optional.
But planning commission.
Planning commission is
Mandatory
mandatory.
for land use issues.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
So, at this point, is there, do we want to go into the 17.4.4 and 17.4.5?
I think it would be helpful maybe, at least for me, if we had a little discussion maybe on the landscape standards. Just quickly, take a couple of minutes. Now, I'll just read the draft language, if that's, okay, so on 17.4.5, landscape standards. Leeds Town encourages water-wise landscaping, i.e. xeriscaping, and the following landscape requirement is intended to promote town beautification and water conservation. The minimum landscape requirement consists of a landscape strip outside of the public, or outside of the street right-of-way, along the front of the property. The landscape strip shall have an average width of 10 feet, but no less than 6 feet at the narrowest point. The driveway area may be excluded from the landscape area calculation for the purpose of determining the minimum required landscape area. And paragraph 1, at least 1/2 by 50% of the required landscape area shall be covered with live foliage consisting of shrubs, trees, or ground cover. Landscape area shall be provided with permanent automatic irrigation system. The landscape area and irrigation system shall be maintained in good condition. So I think this is entirely consistent with the idea of xeriscape. Xeriscaping is not zero, it's not gravel, it is desert type shrubbery, low water use shrubs and trees, that type of thing. So low water use. Then going on, it says the landscape requirement applies to all new development within a commercial zone and the remodeling or expansion of the existing development where there is an increase in the building's floor area by 50% or more. In the landscape definition, any combination of living plants such as trees, shrubs, ground covers, flowers, grass, or other plants that are generally not considered to be weeds or noxious plants, along with non-vegetated ground covers such as rocks, stone, or bark chips. So that's the proposed requirement. Again, it obviously applies only to the commercial zone. So if you think about this, and I probably should have a drawing where we can bring them. You think of that straight frontage, in St. George, it would change it around over the years. They used to have a 5% minimum. Now it's a frontage, it's a width requirement, it has to be 15 feet along the front of the property. That's really where it has the most effect. If you were trying to down beautification, it's behind the sidewalk, it's out there in front. So if you think of that straight frontage along the lot width, excluding the driveway area, then they're going to have at least a 10-foot deep landscape area as wide as the property. Half of that area then has to have kind of shrubs or trees or something, some kind of live vegetation within that 10-foot strip. So I don't think it's a real burdensome requirement.
I do have one problem with the bark chips. The wind here, on the wind, even without the wind, they're only good for about a year or two. And without being properly maintained, they look horrible.
That's good comment.
That's good. I'd rather take that right out of the,
Sure. I have no problem with that at all.
I've landscaped those in the past, and 2 years later, whether the wind blows or not, they look trashy.
Okay, that's good. I agree with that. I think that tends to be a problem. Anyway, I don't know if you have any questions or ideas or how you feel it's
I think the rest of it
workable.
is adequate.
Can you put a definition for ground cover? I don't see that.
No, we haven't got it, ground cover would be, some type of live plant material, would be, ice plant or green or anything.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, after you mentioned bark, if bark's not listed, if somebody thinks I'm gonna put ground cover down, I'm gonna put some type of a weed inhibitor, and then I'm gonna throw bark or whatever on top of it, and I cover the ground.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
The bark being, although
I
it's,
see what you're saying, that they would consider ground cover to be a bark.
Yeah.
We need to say vegetative ground cover or something like
Yeah.
that.
okay. Theoretically, it's part of the sentence that says these are living plants, but we can add vegetative ground cover.
Yeah.
Although would bark be considered vegetative?
The C down on 17.
Or the live ground cover.
The C, it says living plants,
Live.
and then they say trees, shrubs, and ground covers, so it makes it sound like living ground covers, so that's what I'm clarifying.
So we'd say vegetative ground cover, or we could say live ground cover, either one.
just delete from that first sentence, any combination of woody plants such as trees, shrubs, delete ground covers, or other plants are generally not considered to be weeds or noxious plants, along with non-vegetative ground covers such as rock, stone, gravel.
I'm saying that's
Just eliminate that one.
Because if it's gonna be a plant, it doesn't matter the type of plant.
So you leave flowery grass in there, or just flowers, grass, or other plants that are generally not considered to be used attractive.
Palm trees or cactus or whatever, and surround them with a decorative rock or gravel or, yeah.
Okay.
And then we have 1710.1. In addition, you want to move to that?
Yeah, then on the next page, you got 17.10.1, just read the whole section. Says all material and merchandise, except vehicles in running order, shall be stored in an enclosed building or within an enclosure surrounded by a side obscuring fence or wall of not less than 6 feet in height. And no material or merchandise shall be stored to a height of more than the height of the enclosing fence or wall. That's language that exists in the code today. So then you can see the part that's deleted. We're going to read in the new language that's saying, where commercial development abuts residential property, the commercial property developer shall provide a 6-foot-tall solid masonry wall along the property line separating commercial and residential properties. Within a front setback area along the public street, the wall shall not exceed 4 feet in height. So that's, again, the addition makes it clear that when the commercial abuts residential property, the commercial developer is responsible for putting in a solid masonry wall along that common,
The 4 foot in height is usually, in your setback area, is usually always been standard 3 foot.
3 feet.
Well, I don't know if it's 3 feet in Leeds, but I know it's in George it is.
It's 4 feet. Yeah, that's what it is now.
I'm just curious, the front setback, wouldn't that be a street? So.
Yeah, front setback along the public streets, so that typically 25 to 30 feet, that is defined as a setback area over, we don't have buildings.
It's not about it being about residential property, it's just about if you have a wall in the front.
Yeah.
Okay, so this isn't going to obstruct traffic flow. Okay, that's right.
Okay, but, so I understand, it says when you get within that setback, the wall that's between the property line, that's commercial property and residential property, cannot exceed 4 feet in height. But it's the same wall that's 6 feet in height once you get beyond the setback. I think phrasing-wise, unless we're saying we want it to be an inch high, the way it's phrased right now, it says you really don't need to put a wall in the setback area. And I'm not sure what the right answer is.
You need to have a minimum of 2 foot, not to exceed 4 foot.
Yeah, and then I was thinking we could also add the phrase, unless the town council requires total wall. I mean, I guess there's a possibility. Normally, when you're along a public street, you don't want the 6-foot wall coming out to the public street.
And I think that's the point of this sentence.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking, I don't know if there's occasions where you may want that taller wall to extend for protection of the residential property.
But there's no residential property that it abuts on the front setback.
Well, there could be. It could be a common side property. It could be a common side property.
And that would be the front.
No,
We're not
that's
talking
not.
about a wall along the front parallel to the street. We're talking about a wall that is
Approaching the
perpendicular
street.
to the street.
Yeah,
But
so,
no, but this particular sentence addressed a front setback,
Yes.
so
not
if
a
this
side.
is, say this is the commercial property and this is the residential.
Mhm.
So I'm just thinking, this is your street obviously, so you, normally you come down here, then you come to this setback area, you jump down to a 4 foot.
Ah,
Right, you'd be 6 feet, 6 feet, whatever, of course, now we're really
Thank
talking
you.
about the boundary. Then when you come to the front setback along the street, you drop down 4 feet. I'm just saying, there potentially, maybe an instance, I don't know, where you may want that 6 foot to continue up closer just as a protection.
Well, I got that mixed up, because
Okay.
on a corner radius, it can't be higher than 3 feet.
Oh, yes, on a corner lot, that's correct, on a corner lot.
But the point I was raising, Bob, is that the way it's worded, it could drop down to
Yeah.
1 inch. It doesn't say you need to continue the wall at any specific height, it just says it can't be more than 4 feet.
So they say shall be a minimum of, we just say shall.
Shall be 4 feet in height. And so-
Well, I don't know that you need to enforce that wall continue all the way up to the street.
Especially if the resident's driveway is right along that wall.
Yeah.
I can see that car trying to,
I'm just thinking of
Back
safety,
out.
yeah, safety issues, like a kid a small child walking behind a 4 foot wall.
That's my concern, is your visibility for traffic.
But I believe that there are other instances where it says the town council may require, and I think we might be able to put language in there that would allow us, it could be worded the way it is right now, but could add language that would suggest that the town council may require a wall up to 4 feet in height if it's deemed appropriate for the particular situation.
I could live with that.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
So I'll change that, we'll say the town council may, in front of the setback area, may require a wall of 4 feet.
Right.
So that's kind of a change we proposed, and we'll redraft it and just take it back to the planning commission.
Okay.
One reason I have dropped the not exceeding 20,000 down to 10,000 was I thought for a town this size, this would accommodate more than enough cars that would be appropriate for a town our size, especially on commercial rather than industrial area. Okay, any other comments at this point on chapter 17? Next on the agenda, discussion of the LDWA tank on Silver Ridge Road. And a while back, it was requested that maybe we find out what the neighbors, people within a certain distance, think about this. And so as a result, I drafted an email letter that said it was an informal inquiry, because at that point, that's what it is. If LDWA wants to proceed, there'll have to be a formal inquiry, and that will require a lot more work. And just as a tally of the responses that I got, I was able to have conversations or email responses from the larger landowners at the Hamilton and Sant that are near the property, and then the one directly to the west, shall we say, yeah, west of the lot, the Larsons, further to the west, the Smiths, Addison's, Malley. These are people that I got responses from. And the Hamilton, Sant, Larson, Smith, Jill Anderson, which is, her property is to the south of that. And this person is not a landowner yet. Mike, write down his last name. Yes, Scioto is planning on buying the Perry property, which has been in an estate settlement for several years. That's on Silver Hills. And he said he had no problem with it. So that was 6 people that I got positive responses from, that they had no problem with LDWA making this move. 2 other people that responded back, one said, no, I think they should use their money in other ways, and another one said they wanted more information. People who received a letter at their door, the Schwares, Villalobos, and whoever owns the gold property. At this point, that's the house behind the Malley Osmers. Got no response from them. I think they are probably gone for the summer. Not contacted for various reasons were the Welch house. I didn't have an address on them, and they had this no trespassing sign at their front door. The Crosby family trust, or whatever it is, that owns property to the south. The Cape Cod house, which nobody's at, has changed ownership again, if you know what I mean. The Corner house, also no one there. And the Wolfram house is also in a state of flux. It's been dead now for about a year. So, 8 people have responded, and out of 12 people contacted, and 6 of those responses were positive. 2 were either no or want more information, and the rest were no response.
The problem I have personally with this is, granted, LDWA provides our water to us, but because they provide our water to us, I feel like we're giving them a little more leeway than we are Mr. Kilkey. Because in a sense, it's about the same situation. The zoning's not there. They're looking for a conditional use permit. And I think we're setting a precedence that might come back and bite us in the rear later.
Yeah, and there's another situation, and I don't know if Elliot's aware of it or the water board's aware of it, but there isn't, your building could be on BLM land, and the road is owned by BLM, and there's probably not enough easement.
The property itself.
No.
The street
The
is
street is so wide that BLM has that land. And so when we thought the reason we couldn't repair part of the road because we thought the property owner came in the middle, what ends up happening is the BLM owns that land in there, and Sants and them are gonna try and get permission to do the road. But the way it is, there wouldn't be enough setback for that tank because of the road.
I'm not worried.
Can I answer that?
Yes.
I pulled the plat map and I went down to the county and pulled the entire map. LDWA owns that road, not the BLM. LDWA on their plat map, if you pull that exact footprint of what we own on there, it is LDWA owns almost 3/4 of that entire road.
That's what we see.
And I can bring that map to you. 'Cause
Rick Sant came in with the information from the BLM and then claimed it's theirs.
It's, at the recorder's office, it shows that it's LDWA's, and then she went over that quite extensively with me. So
Yeah. And I understand what you guys want to do, but I have to agree that, it's residential. And here's something, a scenario you should think of. So you go in and you put your office complex in there. And then a couple years later, you decide that you don't want to use it. Now you have an option. Somebody's going to say, well, I'm going to make that a home because it's residential. Or you're going to say, I'm going to make it commercial now, and it changes that, and it slips in. And so that creates a problem. The other part is, you guys cut into the tank. You didn't get a permit. I mean, it's the same scenario. You know, everybody should be working with the town. I'm not slapping your hand, but I'm just saying we all need to be consistent, because I was just talking about the other project. And that's what's important. And if we're making exceptions all the time, then we run ourselves into a problem, because then we made an exception, now we have to make an exception for someone else.
Well,
And I
I would respond.
Yeah.
We're not asking for this exception. My understanding is that, as I mentioned last time.
Oh, Mike, please.
You want to sit here?
Yeah, and there may be an issue where that's grandfathered in, and that may be the.
Just so everybody remembers, Quest, which is now CenturyLink, is a utility just like ours, and they are a rural residential, which is more than we are. We're only residential, so they can have chickens and cows, and we can't. We're not asking for, the reason we're bringing in this angle is again because we don't want to bring commercial in the area for the very reason you're stating. I'm not looking for approval, for that. We're looking for the same thing that the other utility has.
But they're
That
using.
gives you a good opportunity to use that and say, we're not making any special deals. We're giving the same thing that the other utility has. That's all we're asking for. And the tank's already there. I mean, if it's an eyesore, if you think it's an eyesore or not, it's there. It isn't going to go anywhere. It isn't going to go anywhere. It would cost zillions of dollars to tear it down. It's a battleship parked up there. And we need to make use of it. And I don't see in this, if we set it up as one of the reasons I want to set up a permanent home for LDWA, the board wants to set it up, is so that we don't have to worry about moving around anymore. And once that's a permanent operations center, I don't think anybody's going to go in and try and reinvent the wheel.
Well, so my concern is, and we had this conversation before, they're running a major data hub through this communication center. And that's where we have to be letting the conversations up there on that. Now, if they were testing the water, or they had testing facilities, and that's where they're running their tests, then at that point it would become a utility type,
And that's
special improvement.
that's what we'll be doing. We can call it wherever we want, but we will be testing quantity. That's what we do. And we're going to have, every tank's going to be on telemetry. Right now, one is. Every tank's going to be. There's going to be an area designated. It's already in the drawings. It's been in the drawings since we started. It's going to be basically where all it's going to be, so we have access to it. So it is a data center, because all we're going to do now is punch in. We've already started doing that. One of the problems with the water company, at least one of the problems we as a board believe we had, was we weren't measuring it well enough. We weren't staying on top of the system. And part of that is knowing what the tank levels are at all times. And we're talking 5 tanks.
So you'll be using that as a data center.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't know what anybody's going to call it, but that's what it will be. I mean, we'll be using it for that. That's part of the plan. That's one of the reasons we want that as an operation. We've already checked the telemetry from that location. We can hit every tank, including the one we just brought in and we're about that.
Because that was my concern, was in our last conversation, if we call it a data center, a data collection center, then I think it qualifies just like CenturyLink would. But if we call it an office or LDWA, then it's an office. And it's a.
Well, like I said, it'd be a central hub. I mean, I haven't really thought about the semantics of it, but that is what it is. It is what it will be.
It will be a data center.
Yeah, I mean, we will be collecting data there. And we'll all be zoned into that location. Like I said, one of the things that is nice about it is it can't get the tank we just brought back in the El Dorado area, which is a 100,000-gallon tank. It's a straight shot. That's one of the things we were thinking about when we were bringing that tank back in. Work with the location.
Same, in my perspective, and I don't know about the rest of the councils, but if that's a fact, then I don't have a problem with that. We do the data hub and have offices there to run your data.
Now, the tank is, what, 40 feet in diameter?
I forgot. Yeah,
Do you recall?
It's something like that, yeah.
Yeah, because it's really high or square, they got the total floor space.
So that only gives you like 125 square feet, which is not a lot of
No,
space.
maybe it's the decimal point, that's
Yeah.
1,200.
Yeah, it's fairly, actually, it's very large, it will be two-story internally.
Right. Um,
If I could make a comment during this discussion, I believe I was the origin of asking to make sure we made the neighbors aware of it. And while I appreciate the great amount of work that must have gone into trying to contact each of them individually, that my desire is to try to get everybody in one room at a public meeting here. I know they're not all going to make it, but I also know in the past I was a member of a board where there were 9 people on it and 8 people spoke as the board was offering their input, and they all spoke in one direction on the issue. And then the 9th person brought something up, and by the time the vote came around, it was 180 degrees from where it had been. And I think that's an important part of government, an important part of interacting with the community, is getting as many people as possible into a room. And my concern is just that we make sure, I'd like the whole town to know about it, but I want to make sure that the people who are going to be most neighborly with the water tank when the final decision is made are definitely aware that the discussion is taking place. And that's what I would like us to move forward with, is to make sure that we send a letter. And I think that LDWA maybe even offered to provide some labor and all. I think the town needs to provide the actual ceiling.
It's more defined than that. They have to.
Well, this isn't a hearing that we're having, so I don't think it's defined quite that way. But I think they've offered, and I think we got to take them up on it. But I think we as the town should be the ones to actually put the letters in the envelopes, take them to the post office, and just, from a due diligence, make sure that we know it went out to those folks to let them know about it. I'd like to see it happen on August 14th at our next meeting, because I just think it's the right way to try to move this issue forward. And I understand some people might not be here, but I think we have to set a calendar. We've got a month to go right now, and I think that's plenty of time to do that. And I would feel a lot more comfortable after I've had a chance to hear everybody speak to decide what I think makes sense as a result of it from my position on town council. It's not putting it to a vote of the community, but it's asking for the input of the community so that we have all of the different aspects of it, heard from before we make our decision.
And we want to do that, and we're requesting that. We don't want to just, we live here. I mean, we're citizens, we're volunteers, and we don't want to make anybody unhappy. And we definitely want input. I mean, I'm just in the area, people who live up here, definitely.
Well, there's another thing, Elliot, that's really, really crucial here. I mean, we can talk about plus or minus whether this is grandfathered in or not, but the road issue is a very serious one. As people are coming down that turn, and if BLM has that property and there's a setback, then I don't believe, let's say this, if the council and all the people came to a hearing and said, okay, we agree with this puts a burden on the town. If we have to shift that road over to make sure that anybody pulling out, there wouldn't be a blind spot. I think your organization would have to come up with funding to make sure that there was a way of egress and we wouldn't have people pulling out because of the blind spot.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't think it would be a blind area. If we have to do something, but if it is, we have to do that. And I'm sure there should be a stop sign, on our end, going down into it.
Right, but if they're not going to be able to see someone coming down the hill.
Well, if you, I've actually driven it. If you're there, it's not blind. It's the way it's configured right now. That's one of the things we did discuss. I don't know about the road issue with BLM. I do know, as Danielle said, we went over the plat map and everything we have, and it appears that we have ownership of that road area. I'll be happy to we'll look into it on our end and see and have an answer.
I wasn't aware of it until Rick Sant came to the mayor and brought this to the council about the.
And everything I'm seeing shows that we actually have that property. So I don't know.
Would a survey be appropriate? Because I don't know who owns that road, and I've heard so many conflicting opinions of all along Silvery Road.
It's something that we've discussed, it's, that would help the process. We could do that.
I think Silver,
This is the first I've heard of it, so I don't really know how to answer it. But we can look into it and see if that's the case. Everything we have doesn't show that, so I don't know where they're getting it. Like I said, the survey was something that we were thinking about anyway.
Can I have
So-
an offer?
just a second, Mr. Sant did not know about it until he looked into it. And if you think back, he spent several years developing Silver Point Estates on paper and thought he had everything covered. And then he finds that there is this BLM wedge right through two of his roads. And so it is something that really needs to be investigated more.
The reason I'm fairly 100% certain about the roads because when Maurice Hall was the president, we actually sold a portion of land so that somebody next to us would have an easement.
Mr.
Or-
Larson.
Right. And when they did that, they actually surveyed that entire land before they did that, and survey went into the road.
Actually, Mr. Larson told me that his survey goes all the way over to Cletus Hamilton's fence.
Right. And so that's why I'm fairly 100% certain that I know, but besides pulling the plat map, when we did that survey, LEWA in that aspect did the entire parcel just to make sure that we would have enough. And when they, the surveys might still be there. If you go and look for the little corner marks.
Now, Mr. Sant did say that he was going to have that BLM section surveyed. He's going to pay to have it surveyed. And it occurred to me that in any case, you might want to talk to him because if the lower part of your property is in that BLM section, you would need to have permission from the easement to have egress off of Silver Road.
Again, we've looked into this for a while. Hopefully, better than this result. And we haven't found anything that seems to be a problem.
Right.
Do you have contact with BLM that you mentioned with his name?
No, not that we know of, but there's another part that might make this complicated. This is part of a mining claim. They have supersede powers over property that's been possibly surveyed wrong and it's carried forward. When they go back and start looking through the records, the mining claims have a trump. So,
We'll contact the BLM tomorrow and see what the story is.
I think it would probably be the next step to verify.
We'll do that tomorrow.
The map that he brought in indicated in this copy, it was 500 feet long on Silver Road, the right-hand wall. I don't remember how wide.
I'll also contact him and see if he can copy it. But again, what we looked at, we researched it, what we have is basically doesn't show that. So, BLM's been wrong before too. But that, again, we don't want to, we're not, what's there right now, I mean, my mind is a nice one. It's a cement tank that's not being used for anything. It's abandoned. And I don't see, I mean, I can understand some trepidation, but we really are going to make it nice. And I think that it could actually bring something to town where it could be interesting that you have a water company that's located in a water tank. You gotta go to Vegas to see something like that.
And I want to make it clear on my side, I'm not against it.
Sure.
I'm just trying to set, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to set precedents.
Sure, I understand
to where,
that.
and if it's,
And like I said,
you agree with that, Frank? My verbiage?
we don't want to set a precedent.
But the verbiage
Something
as a data center, and conditional use permit,
Well,
would be a little different.
There's going to be some, we have to do some research, because I don't think the council should expose themselves if we're going to play one way and then play it differently. We need to be consistent with what we do.
I agree.
And that's why I came with the information about that utility, just because it looks to me like if you use that, you're not doing anything that's out of the ordinary, you're not doing us any special favors, you're just giving us the same thing they have. Again, we're not rural residential, we're just residential, and if there's something that needs to be done to lock that location for just our use, we'd be happy to do that. I don't know if that's something that you can legally do, but I mean, we're not.
Just stuff that has to be checked into.
Okay, we're not looking to, again, I think once we're there, I don't think anybody's ever gonna.
Alright.
So we can check with Leland tomorrow, and then Mr. Zan can get some information from him. Is there somebody that we deal with? Is there anybody, who we get information?
Yes,
You mean whatever information you
I can
receive?
send it to everybody.
Yeah. Send it to all of us.
That you sent to the office?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not opposed to it, I just want to make sure that we're,
And I appreciate that as a councilperson, that's, I said, we want to be above board transparent in everything we do, and that includes this building, and I really want to do it correctly, and that's why we're going to do it.
No, what it would say is that, the utilities is not a conditional use under residential, which is what the lot is zoned as currently. It is a conditional use under, rural residential. So it may require you to go to a zone change from residential to rural residential. And then it would fall under the conditional use. So that would be another step in the process. Any other thoughts? Do y'all have any more questions?
Do you have a contact person at the BLM, or who actually told you about this that I can?
Well, Rick Sample, we don't have that.
No.
We'll contact both he and the BLM. We talked to her. So we'll talk to them. And if we have to survey it, we'll do it. We haven't discussed it. Maybe we have to do that. But everything we have shows that we have actually.
you'll check out money frames.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to try to move this though with notification of the community across the board, but particular directed notification to the neighbors for our next meeting in a month, because we have the Pioneer Day holiday that we will not be meeting in July.
You want to have a public hearing?
No, it's not a public hearing. I'd like it to be a discussion item, but I'd like to make sure we've notified the public in advance, where we could start that notification now and make a point of making sure we notify by mail all of the neighboring properties that would be most directly impacted by anything down there.
That would seem to be a good next step, because I think to do proceeding any further may require a zone change, and so to get a more formal input, I think that we should schedule that for the next town council meeting, which is
August 14th.
August 14th. Yeah, that number. Any other thoughts?
Thanks.
Okay, the last thing, not the last thing, the last thing under discussion items are health and safety violations. In an attempt to not be inflammatory or name names, we have several health and safety violations in town that are long standing, at least one of them, and that is the Johnson House on South Main. And I talked to the not county, but Southern Utah Health Department as to what force they could bring to bear on this. And basically they said not much. That they did indicate that if there were toxic leaks, seepage of some kind onto adjacent properties or the street, then yes, that would qualify them to go. If there were child endangerment issues on that property, then we could work through Department of Child and Family Services, and they could authorize the health department to then inspect. But other than that, we were kind of on our own. But we do have some clauses within our planning land use that indicate that you may not allow your residential property to be overgrown with weeds, have noxious situations, and I think the house there fully fits into those requirements. And I'm not being specific right now because today when I went to find it, since I spent hours reading various sections, I couldn't remember exactly where I read it, but I will find it again. And the fire department has indicated they will not enter the house in case of a fire. They can blow water from the street, but so there's definitely health and safety situations there. There may even be having checked on, is it Zillow or Google Maps? It appears there may be stagnant pool in the backyard somewhere. The next door neighbor that I have talked to expressed concerns about the possibility, particularly if there is a fire, of rats evacuating the property and running over their yard that the children play in. And so I think that we're getting really pretty close on some documentation that we can, and previous mayors have tried to do something, but there hasn't been follow-up. And I think that's where we are now. I think that we really need to move ahead on that, particularly since we now have a second house on Main Street that is rapidly approaching the same situation. So that is definitely something that I would appreciate any input that any of you have.
Are the residents living in this home?
Yes.
Yes.
Um,
The other house does have a child, so that one would be good, perhaps.
There's other ways of looking at it.
Okay.
And it has to do with trespass. So anything in that yard of vectors that are going to trespass into the neighbor's yard is a violation. And anything that considers to be, for example, if you have smells that go across the property line, those can be determined either as a nuisance or as trespassing. And the health department has to deal with those because they have to test to see if any of those could create any type of epidemic, meaning that other people would be at risk.
That could go into that leakage aspect.
Exactly.
They were.
And we've got an attorney here who would, I guess, nod his head to that.
If there is a stagnant pond, then also I thought about bringing in mosquito abatement laws.
Well, and then you also have, by having things there, there's what's called an attractive nuisance. So if somebody's curious of what's there, that creates, it's just like having a swimming pool without a cover or a fence, or somebody brings their swimming pool onto somebody else's property, that's trespassing, and they have to be fined for that, so.
Now, we did have a meeting with the sheriff's department here, Clay Pulsiver and Bartlett, his second command, and Shauna Jones, the deputy chief for, can't remember the word, for City Health Patrol. And so I asked specifically along this line, how how could they be helpful? And if we have laws that would apply, then they could issue a citation for us. And that's why I wanted to see it, because I'm wondering if it did say it was a Class B misdemeanor. And but he said that we're sort of like in the same boat as Tocqueville, who, even though they pay extra for extra coverage from the sheriff's department, they do not have a prosecutor. And as such, any sheriff's actions are kind of a dead end. And so I talked to our county attorney, I talked to our town attorney about it, and he said that he would recommend talking to the county attorney's office prosecution section to see if we could, because he said other towns have done that, contract with an individual prosecutor to serve as a as-needed basis for us. And whether we could, that's probably just an administrative action. I just wanted to let y'all know that that's something we're looking into. So that we do have, if everything seems to fall into place, I would like to just move ahead and do that. All right. Citizen comments at this time. Maybe if you didn't sign up and you have a comment. Any? No citizen comments at this point?
I would.
Okay.
Frank, I'm Larry Dalton, and I do own the property down the street. A little bit offended by how you come across there. Now, had you been at the last meeting, you would have seen that I have gone every step of the way to try and do everything absolutely correctly. Question was asked by Mr. Peterson whether or not, why did I go ahead and build things without going ahead and following protocol. The fence that I put up there initially was to do nothing but personal use, period. Because my future plans is to make a car lot down there. And with that, I've already accumulated some cars, but I can't sell them, I can't do anything but fix them. So that property was designed initially to do nothing but just to hide those cars down there, until which time I can get an office built and to establish a car lot. At that, which is approved by all the ordinances. Now, as far as just dropping the cars off, no. Those cars went down there initially so that they could have a place to have a home while I got ready to sell those cars and become a legitimate business. Now, the reason they came back on top was because I was building the fence. And you can't string barbed wire with cars in the way. And try to put everything else, put the road base in. I conformed with everything that everyone has asked me to do. I have not at any point taken it upon myself to do anything without speaking either to a councilman or planning and zoning. No one, not at any step. So a little bit offended by that statement there, that's saying that I projected to do it and then come ask for help later. No, that was not the intent. At what point I decided to do a business came months later, after the property was already put together. And I had already thought, well, okay, fine. Initially, it's just going to be a car lot. Later came the impound part. It was like, okay, fine, we've got it. It's best use. There's nothing you can do with that property down there but hide things. You can't, there's no electrical, there's no water, there's nothing. So it's just a place to hide stuff. So now, as far as location and everything else down there, you can't even see that property. It's not like what you were talking about over here, Joe, with that property over there. I would concur exactly with what you said, Joe. If I had to go up and down Main Street and I saw nothing but dadgone razor strapping and everything, I'd be doing that. I concur with you 100%. But off in the back where there's nobody there, and conjecture that maybe the other business that might go in there someday, might be offensive to watching, looking at my little lot down there, that's absurd. I might object to what they put in. But at least I've gone the extra mile that everyone has asked me to do along the way, to do everything exactly by the book. I went right with the Utah regulations. I've asked for help all along the way to make sure I did everything correct. So at no point have I taken it upon myself to do anything outside of the bounds. Now, any questions for me?
Staff reports.
We've reached the end of the fiscal year, and we are going to be not only submitting the budget, but doing the final journal entries so that we have ready for the auditors when they start their work. The picture that is accurate as of June 30th, that should be available for the next meeting on August 14th.
I would just make a comment that the trash bill will be going out with several announcements. One is that with this particular billing, our rates will have raised in accordance with planned increases to accommodate raises from solid waste management that were voted on.
We read that, and that won't affect until January 1st.
Oh, so we won't be raising
So we won't be raising
until January
for 6
first.
months.
Okay. You can have that report too. Okay. Is there something that I'm forgetting that I said I was going to?
You asked me to make a motion. Yeah, you did. So I just say, so you forgot to ask Frank to make a motion for adjournment. I move to adjourn.
Thank you.